So, Dr. Wheatley, Meg, it is such a gift to be with you today, and thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start by saying that that we use your work all the time. Of course, always giving you credit, but it has been such a gift to us and has really formed the foundation for a good bit of our leadership work. And so there are
That's wonderful.
two uh,
Yeah.
there are two major concepts or themes that I want to pull on of yours
Okay.
that we draw on significantly in our work, and just ask you to riff
Can I
on it a
just
bit,
ask
if you will.
how long you've been using me? How long have you
Let's
been using my work?
Well, I will say that I've been here at the foundation for 12 years
Okay.
and have been using it since the day I began doing this leadership work. I know that we've been doing this leadership work for over 20 years, and
Yeah.
Gil Rendell, a friend and colleague, really sort of formed and shaped our foundation for this leadership work. And so I know he's been using
Yeah.
your work for over 20 years. Yeah. And I know you've been at it longer than that. So
Well, I've been at it
what a
longer
gift.
by than that, but I keep changing. So,
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
So who do we choose to be has been absolutely foundational. But I'm gonna pull on a couple of concepts and just invite you into the conversation around them. The first idea is that conversation is the currency of change. And that is a phrase that has been foundational to how we do our work. And every time we say it, people say, "Oh, yes, yes." It's almost like they can take a deep breath and say, "Oh, this makes so much sense." And then there are those occasionally that we run into who say, "Really? Conversation's the currency of change? Isn't money the currency of change?" And so I'm curious how you respond to that, but also really would love to hear you talk about where that comes from and how you understand the
Okay.
concept of.
So let me first respond to, isn't money the currency of change? If money was the currency of change, with the trillions of dollars invested in changing organizations, in climate change, in governmental change, if money was the currency of change, we wouldn't be where we are.
Mm,
So
amen.
I just like a Dr. Phil question. So, how's that working for you?
Right. Right. Nice.
So, um, where it comes from is it's in our DNA as a group herding species that we need to be together. And
Mm,
as we invented language, one of my favorite biologist, Umberto Maturana, who passed a few years ago, said that it was the creation of language that allowed us to connect with one another, and that love was born from the ability to connect through
mm,
language. Now we're going to fast forward to what's happened to our ability to use language to connect. And every indigenous tribe that I've ever read about or been with sits around in circle to when they have to talk about something. They don't know
mm.
Robert's rules, they don't know square tables, they sit basically together. And I remember
Nice.
reading a long time ago of I think it was in Brazilian rainforest, that there was a tribe. It had only like 30 people. They had never been touched by Western colonialist culture. And they were observed to, it took them maybe 3 to 4 hours to get in enough food and take care of their needs for the day. And then they sat around talking to each other. And
Mm.
I've always wondered, so if you're with 30 people forever, what do you talk about? Really? But it showed me the absolute genetic programming of our need to express what we see. And once we had language, and it's not all, verbal, it can be, hands and movements and many ways to communicate. But that's what we do when we want to be together. So, again, these are human needs, human capabilities. But where we are now, and this I actually want to test out with you, Lisa, is people don't want to talk to each other anymore. People are mostly afraid it will lead to some big argument, or they'll just get totally upset at what the other person has said. They'll get triggered easily. We all get triggered easily these days. Or we do a uh, quick scan of the person and we think, no, I don't want to talk to that person.
Mm.
And so what I'm tracking is basically this is inherent, innate in us. We need to be able to talk together, to reason together, to sit together without rank. We had all
Mm.
those processes. We had them down cold. How to have host conversations, how to sit in council. Now we're learning. I'm certainly learning about indigenous ways and writing about it. Of when something goes wrong, you bring the community together. You
Yeah.
don't isolate individuals. But look at where we are with the,
Yes.
social media has completely distorted relationships and made hate, death
Mm.
threats, um,
Mm.
all of that just commonplace. When I live in Utah, when Senator Romney announced his resignation, he also said that he's paying $5,000 a day to protect his family.
Wow.
This is, you know, tragic, untenable, and yet an indication of the. This is the age of threat,
Mm.
and people feel threatened. And then when you speak out or you take a stand, you get these threats that are just beyond all comprehension to me. So, what I want to ask for your congregations is what's happening, how easy or difficult it is to bring people together in conversations where people are patient, respectful, and
Mm.
curious about each other, because we
Mm.
still know the recipe
Yeah.
for hosting great conversations that do lead to healthy problem solving, that lead to in better relationships and a feeling of we truly are in this together. But what I see in the large landscape is we have a serious problem. But I'd be interested in everyone thinking about this who's listening and your own experience.
So, Meg, you jumped ahead and answered a question I was going to ask about the essential ingredients, right? Patience, trust. Um, but
And
I'm with you.
curiosity about the other.
Curiosity about the
Curiosity
other.
about the other.
And I'm with you. Like I just recently had a trip to the States, and I was watching it. I think you're right. This is an age of threat. People are worried about all kinds of things, and so feels like they're not slowing down to sit with one another, to listen deeply to one another. And I'm wondering, is that because we've lost some of that essential ingredient? Have we lost curiosity? Is fear
No,
too
it's because
slow?
it's a very simple neurobiological explanation for this.
Okay.
When we feel under threat, we instantaneously, autonomically retreat into the reptilian brain, which is facing is about our survival.
And is that
So when we're under threat, we have no choice. We are not conscious human beings. I mean, in my newest book, which we can talk about called Restoring Sanity, I talk about how can we be human beings being fully human? Well, you can't expect fully human behavior. You can't expect consciousness, compassion, love, imagination, vision when people are scared, because that's pure self protective behavior. So there's a a remedy here. Don't expect anything
Mm,
about all these beautiful human capacities we have. Don't expect anything until
mm,
people have calmed down and we've reawoken
mm.
their inherent human capacities that all come from grace, spiritual connection, and our frontal lobes. Scared
And
people cannot talk to each other, they defend themselves.
no, I totally take that's such truth, right? I guess I have a
Yeah.
follow-up question, which is also something that's necessary that we must slow down because if like
Well, that's part
every
of it. Yeah. Sit
everything's
down.
we've got to slow down, we've got to sit down, we've got to
It's
be.
like the first thing to do in a congregation, in a meeting, in a offering of any kind of, like I offer courses online. The first thing I focus on is, can we all just settle in, be
Mm.
grateful that we have this opportunity? Can we all just calm? I mean, it's calming our nervous systems. It's reigniting the better parts of the human brain, and it's also truly opening to spirit. You know, so you have to do that before you can expect any good human behavior. We're human animals at this point. We're desperate to self-preserve. And the other thing that's important to notice is when we are in the primitive brains, we have an instinctive fear of anything that looks different. This has been
Ah,
proven with tests that if you show people every tenth of a second, you show them an image of a person, when you put up a person who looks different, in our case, it would be dark skin, the amygdala lights up like, oh, threat.
Hmm.
Strangely, that's overcome if the black or a person of color is wearing a baseball cap from your favorite team. Like fan loyalty transcends color.
it transcends. Wow.
That's how completely crazy we are, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
anyway, we have a need when we're in fear to just relate to comfortable others, no strangers, absolutely nothing strange. So we can overcome this because we still have full human brains. And in this case, you have spiritual grounding with people. So the first thing is to just settle in and enjoy the fact that we have time. So this would go under slowing down, but it's actually deeper, Shannon.
Hmm.
We be grateful that, look, we be grateful to each other. We all took the time to be here, and let's each hear a story from the other. So we start to realize, oh, there's a lot of commonality here. Yes, we're all human. I mean, these things always worked well in the past. Now they're an absolute necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I so appreciate the way that you're bringing in the neuroscience into this and what's happening in the room because I think you're right. As we live in this age of threat, and when we have lost the, mm, I don't know if it's it's not just the capacity because I think we have the capacity, but we've lost maybe the training or the practice of sitting down together, of being curious about each other, of which is we've lost the practice of conversation and
Yes.
how important that is.
And what I'm giving is a richer explanation of why it's become so hard.
Yes.
That
Yes.
it used to be you would come in, you'd socialize, maybe you'd have a moment of prayer or greeting, and everyone would be ready to talk.
Hmm.
But now people come in and you have to reawaken these
Hmm.
inherent capacities. And we do
Yeah.
that. It's a physical issue we're up against. And
Yeah.
then it allows people to be together, to reason well, to vision well, to have imagination, to develop compassionate respect for one another. and to also connect with spirit. You don't connect with spirit from fear. I mean, we do. Most prayers, as Annie Lamott once said, most prayers are help, help. Thank you. That's really to prayer.
Right. Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I'm going to pivot us a little bit because the other idea that has given us really the foundation and the vision for the work that we're doing right now is your two loop theory that you developed with Deborah Fries. And just for our listeners, we'll put a link in of the image into our show notes so that you can access that. But I would love, Meg, for you to talk a little bit about that two loop theory, and then
And
we'll
I'm
we'll
going
maybe
to
dig
take
a
it
little bit deeper.
into the present moment when
Great, perfect.
what is on the two loops now is why I'm focused on us developing the role of warrior for the human spirit.
Yes.
So the original two loops, which is a good 30 years old, and
Mm,
has been used everywhere, describes that when the major paradigm or the major culture has is going through its final stages. All civilizations have stages, like we have stages, and collapse and death is the last stage of a civilization. We're in that now with global culture, actually. But the two loops created a role for those who would give birth to the new in the midst of the degradation of the old. It originally had what people still want to believe is true, but I'm going to crush those dreams right now. It had the belief that if we got together as radicals, rebels, in strong communities together inside the disintegration of our culture, that we could give birth to the new. And when things got really tough, people would have us as places of being together in new ways and giving birth to a new culture and civilization. Well, the bad news is that cultures, civilizations have life cycles, and they don't create the people who create the new are now at this time with extreme climate destruction. We do not have the necessary conditions to give birth to more justice, less poverty, more equity, more inclusive. We're all one species. I still hear my fellow speakers and authors writing about, well, we're all human. Why can't we come
mm,
together in our humanity? Well, we don't have those conditions. If you look, how many ethnic wars are now going on with increasing intensity? I mean, it's gone up
yeah.
a factor of, more than double just in this year, the
Mm,
number of ethnic conflicts and migrants, pure people just having to flee. Um, what we can do is, in the midst of the old, I no longer feel we are giving birth to the new, but we can be the best human beings possible. We need to embody the
mm,
finest qualities of compassion and kindness and generosity and creativity. And we need to come together. This is where community, you know, the slogan of my institute, Berkana Institute, is whatever the problem, community is the answer. So, community, we need to come together. We need to strengthen our local communities. I am now calling them islands of sanity.
mm. Yes.
And we won't succeed in reversing any of what's been set in motion with the planet, with the planetary systems, with the oceans, with the air, with the animal species extinctions. We can't reverse this. We just have to prepare to be the best we can for all the destruction we've already created and what's ahead of us. So this is where I know you're interested in the role of catalyst. Now I want us to be the embodiment now
Mhm.
of the very best. I want us to be memory joggers for people like, oh, this is what it's
Mm.
like to be around a calm and thoughtful person. Oh, this is what it's like to engage in rational conversation where I really feel closer to you because of the quality of the exchange, the listening. People need to know that no matter what the future brings. I mean,
Mm.
I now will go into my preacher. You can preach this if you want, but it's what is the meaning of a good human life? What is the meaning of a good human life? Period. It's not what we're dealing with right now in this age of destruction and loss and threat. Is people feel completely upended, abandoned, lied to about what a meaningful life was, as well as what our politicians are doing, keeping reality from us. So it's really important for those of us with strong spiritual faith to answer the question, what is the meaning of my life? What would Jesus do? What did Buddha teach? What do all the great saints throughout time? What was their life about? Well, it was about service, right? It
Mhm.
was about not worrying about death. It was about self sacrifice. And when I know this to be true, I know there are also historically always people who rise, a small group of people who rise to fulfill this role, as the historian Sir John Glubb said, raising the banner of duty and service against the depravity and despair of their time. So I created Warrior for the Human Spirit training, peaceful warriors, spiritual warriors. Our only weapons are compassion and insight. And
Mhm.
that leads to incredibly meaningful, joyful work. But it's not about fixing anything, it's about
Mm.
how we can be together in an intensification of our love for one another. And this is why your work is important, because you have the spiritual grounding to start with. When I talk to corporate leaders, I have to see what's there in terms of their faith in human people, in human beings, and are they willing to work for that? I use a quote on what is faith from Levinas, who is a Holocaust survivor, great philosopher, French and Romanian. And he said, faith is not a question of the existence or non existence of God. It is believing that love without rewards is valuable.
Mhm.
Mm.
And that's why I have shifted to training anyone who's willing to be dedicated and undertake the discipline of training to be this small group of people. And you start in a good place
Mm.
as a
I think
faith
that's
based.
true. When we start from a place of faith and believing that we're always becoming, I mean, that's the good news of the faith, right? Is that we are in fact always uh, becoming and
And
more
what's the
human, more alive.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then the ultimate victory is over the
Mhm.
flesh or the
Mhm.
materialistic demands. I mean, I'll give you a lot of material for sermons right now.
And you have.
Yes.
Trust me.
When I was working with ministers years ago, before I was acknowledging I'm giving you material, there was one woman minister who said, "Oh, I could preach that." That's where I learned the phrase. So,
Yes. That'll
but
preach. Exactly.
it's actually what I want to say to all of us. We're not coming out of this. Climate destruction is not only in our face, but will increase exponentially in the past. Do you know that Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, said just last week in one of his speeches, he said, "We humans have opened the gates of hell."
Mm, mm,
He speaks the
mm.
truth.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so we, with our deep experience with the human spirit, with sacred, with divine,
Mhm,
we know how to be together if we really understand where we are, which is why I insist that people first understand where we are.
mm.
So,
And go ahead, Shannon.
um, you used the phrase a minute ago, memory joggers. That we people need to be memory joggers, and I really love that. I wonder how, and you used it to talk about, people will remember this is what a person of compassion looks like, or a person of reason. But I also think about memory jogging happens at funerals, right? That actually, when somebody's gone, we remember, and actually the deep work of grief. And so I wonder if you could talk to the role of grief in this moment, because I think your two loop theory speaks to it, that there's always this dark night, things fall apart, the job of leaders in that moment. But is
Right.
there something
And
in
I'm
this moment about grief?
glad you brought up grief for a few reasons. Um, in the two loops model, there is the role of hospicing, right?
Mhm.
Mhm,
Getting as gentle a death, but I would change that to as value rich and understanding before you die,
mm.
that you then want to transmit what was really important. You've all had those experiences with the dying, I'm sure. So, this culture, which never dealt with death and never wanted to know about grief. I mean, I was at public events where something terrible had happened, and the leader would say, "Well, we'll grieve and then we'll get on with it." We would not allow grief to touch us. And now it's the big thing. I mean, I was just seeing a podcast come up of an author who said it's what's missing from our culture is the ability to grieve. I think what's missing from our culture is love, actually, and
Mm.
caring for one another. But so where I am with all this grief is yes, and there is a path out of grief, and the path out of grief is service. It's using this deep, rich, dark, emotional state to find meaning in life, right? You
Mm.
think about, I was just telling a friend again of a story I remember of a woman whose son was killed, and she just took to her bed in the deepest depression and despair. And she just wouldn't get out of bed until one morning her deceased son's dog came and forced her out of bed.
Mm.
And she then realized, oh, dogs could be healing for
Mm.
other people who are depressed. So she started this whole movement now of bringing, they bring dogs in now in all disasters to help
Mm.
people, to comfort them. There's even a Minneapolis airport, they had dogs
Mm.
before COVID, um, and pianos you could play. So um, I want us to recognize that death is a natural part of life, which
Yeah.
also helps when I'm talking about civilization collapse. Yeah, it's part of the cycle of life, people. So,
Yeah.
are you going to hold on, grasp, take what you can, which is what most people do, get distracted and deny it? Or are you just going to accept it? Enormous grief and despair for the amounts of suffering that are and will continue to happen. Enormous levels of sadness for what been lost, especially if you're tuned into the planet and
Mm.
other species. Um, And then why do we want to open ourselves to this level of deep, deep, searing grief? Well, we don't want to go down with it, right? We don't want to go into a dark night of the soul and not come out. So, this is where I have found that in my own training of leaders and activists as warriors for the human spirit, we find meaning in service, and we define then that service is different. I'm not creating a bold new innovative organization. I'm working with the people who are inside organizations who are being battered and bruised by over control and lying and change policies. I want to strengthen them, so not so that they can be better workers, but so they can be better human beings and offer themselves. Because, service is the antidote to despair and
Mm.
grief and loss. You create something of value and it helps another person. And we all know this over and over again. I just want to redirect our attention that that's our work.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's
And
very
So
people
this
will only know that if they feel it from me,
Mhm, mhm.
they feel it from someone who's willing to sit and listen to them or not bring anger and violence into a meeting, or is just trustworthy for their presence. So that's our responsibility, and it takes training because it's a very hostile, aggressive, fear-based environment out there. My gosh, how often do
Yeah,
we get triggered?
yeah.
you know yeah.
So I'm hearing this shift. I mean, there's so many shifts we could talk about, as you talked about two loop theory, but also as you think about what the role of leaders, individuals are today, and I would say, we've talked about it in terms of they're innovators and they're doing the new thing, and I'm hearing you say what's most important right now is embodying being wholehearted, being fully human, whatever that language is that is about our own transformation and witness, but also over and over again, you say the answer's in community. Like it's not that we do this alone. Like I'm
Right.
embodying this this peaceful warrior spirit, but I'm actually doing that with others too. And so I'd love for you to talk about that. And then maybe
Yeah.
connected to that, or maybe a follow-up, I don't know, is what's the role of organizations in this? Like
Yeah.
as we try to help,
Yes.
whatever is emerging, or help people be their most human, right? So okay, I'm going to throw all that out there.
Well, I think with the focus on innovation and creativity, yes. But what we are focused on is how to prepare our community, whether it's
Mm,
an online group of friends, pioneers, people, activists, whether it's a team, whether it's a congregation, that is where our best human qualities are needed to
yeah.
be resourceful, creative, resilient, compassionate, loving, kind, all of that, right?
Mm,
What that takes is a different work for leaders. So, my new book, which will be out in March, but which I'm offering a course on that starts October 5th, um, is called Restoring Sanity, Practices to Awaken Generosity, Creativity, and Kindness in Ourselves and
mm.
Our Organizations. So, I am
Yes.
focused on specific practices to create the conditions so people can be generous, creative, and kind. That's my definition of sane leadership, by the way. A sane leader has unshakable faith in people. So we've gained that through our experience, not through what someone told us. So it's real faith, not a belief system. People can be so much better than they're showing up right now.
Mm.
That's where we started. But it's the leader's role to create the condition. So I said the first condition, settle down, people, get people together to just relax, and then
Mm.
give them meaningful work. And so this is a book of practice that I've never written one like this before, of how you bring people together, how you create
Mm.
community, what are the practices for solving problems that actually depend on diversity and need equality and need deep respect and curiosity about each other. So there's very important work to be done. I've just narrowed the focus, the scale down to creating and sticking by this concept of islands of sanity. So, in the midst of this very
Mm.
toxic sea, we cannot swim in it alone. We're all being affected by it. I mean, again, just how often do we feel hopeless or sad or grief stricken or angry? Um, we can't do this without companions. Wonderful spiritual phrase, companions for the journey. Um,
Mhm.
and there are specific practices that will not only bring us together, but keep us together on behalf of being imaginative and creative in solving problems of like food or water or a new technology, whatever. We still need that, but it has to be in this protective space of an
Mm.
island. But the island is inclusive. It's just we're exclusive of all of these terrible dynamics that are creating fear
Mm.
and threat and driving us apart. So for me, it's a very logical evolution. I don't know how it sits with you three, but it's very logical to me. In
Yes.
response to what's happening in the world, I've had people who say, "Well, Meg, you seem so dark and depressed." And I just say, "Have you noticed what's going on? Have you
Right.
lifted your
Right.
gaze and just seen the what's going on
Well,
in
and I
this?"
would say quite the opposite, that yes, there's this, and you kind of name it in your book, Who Do We Choose to Be? There's a facing of reality. Like we have
Yeah.
to face it and name it. But where you say, and then claiming leadership, but then you say the work is restoring sanity in the midst
Yes.
of this. And so, to me, it feels hopeful that you haven't just stayed with the naming of reality, but you are
Exactly.
leaning into the restoring of sanity. And I have used that language of islands of sanity so much because, we have those pockets in our lives and those people, and where you can look at each other and say, this is sanity in the midst of a lot of insanity. And I'm so grateful to you, my dear friend, for being part of my understanding of what it
Yeah.
is to be human and to experience love. And I find you to be hopeful even in the midst of all
Well,
that is around.
or useful, maybe.
Yeah,
I
well,
do play. You would have read this in Who Do We Choose to Be, but when we're asked, "Are you an optimist or a pessimist?" and you establish only one good identity is you have to be optimistic, right? Positive thinking. And by looking at a glass of water, is it half full or half empty? And I just said, well, a warrior looks at that glass of water and says, "Oh my, there's water. Who needs it? And how am I going to
yes.
get it to them?"
Yeah,
Right?
nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's a very important, if you don't face reality, you don't know how to be useful.
Mm.
You can keep tilting at windmills. You can keep saying, "Well, we'll just fix my organization and everything will be fine." As leaders, it's a terrible time to be a leader because we're working with people who are afraid of one another and in
Mm.
such a hostile environment of lies and such a dark future awaits us.
Mm.
But it's no darker than when people faced World War II.
Mm.
Mm.
And we know the people we admire from that terrible time, who were there for each other, who gave service, who gave shelter. So islands
Mm.
of sanity, I'm now describing them as places of possibility, because we
Mm.
can reawaken our creativity, our full human spirits, and also they're places of refuge and sanctuary.
Mm.
And a Christian author recently wrote a book. I don't know her name right now, but there's a concept in nature called refugia, which are places like within a volcano eruption or within a floodplain or within a fire where life is still maintained.
Mm.
So, in the midst of absolute destruction and devastation, nature knows to create these places of possibility and life. So that's what an
Refuge and
island is. It's
possibility.
a
I love it.
refuge, refugia in the Latin. That's a
Mm.
wonderful book, by the way. I will. That's part of the title, refugia, especially for Christians. Is talking
Mm.
about a new Christianity, a new way of being,
Beautiful.
and
Yeah.
it's the same as Islands of Sanity.
I'm with Lisa.
Yes, Shannon.
I'm with Lisa. I find you incredibly hopeful and also offering hope to communities that actually this moment when we actually settle in with one another, there will be creativity.
Yeah,
And if we face reality, this is the moment to solve real problems. Like we don't have to play at it anymore. The world doesn't need us to tilt at windmills or
yes,
right, but we there's real
right.
problems to solve
But
that
the
can
problems we are capable of solving are at a much reduced level of scale.
yeah.
Like, we cannot solve water issues, food justice issues, poverty, uh, misogyny, racism. We can't solve those at the level of scale where they should be solved. We
Mm,
can't.
Mm.
They're not being solved. They won't be solved there. We solve them in our communities.
communities. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
But then
And the
actually if
only thing I would say about, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, but if every community sets about solving them in their communities, then what happens? Right?
Don't get hopeful. No.
Okay.
That hope has a limit.
Well, I
Shannon has
think the
just
one
pushed it.
goal that I offer is hope.
Yeah.
Um, I've written a lot about the problem with hope, our addiction to hope, which is we
Mm.
deny reality by thinking if we just get it together, we'll fix everything, we'll
Mm.
make it all good. Or it's in the original Two Loops model that there are these discrete communities that when they come together will achieve critical mass and new structures and ways of being will emerge. But what's happening now is we cannot stop what has emerged. These
Mm.
global
Mm.
systems of greed and corruption and the elites taking everything for themselves and not caring a bit about people, that's in the pattern of collapse. It happens in every civilization. It's enraging to see it happening here, but boy, is it happening,
Mm.
right? Um,
On steroids.
so, so we create these healthy little refugias, these refuge places of refuge. We do connect to other places of refuge. Life
Mm.
will continue, who knows for how long, but we can be the best we can be.
Mm.
Um, Whatever our time left on the planet, or however much time the planet gives the human species. It's getting darker day by day. So when Antonio Guterres said we have opened the gates of hell, this is a man who knows, who sees,
Mm.
and
Mm.
so you can look at that and say, well, that's not true. We're going to do this. We're going to invest $5 billion here, $100 billion here. No, let us take that and be the best saint like people we can be,
Mm.
really, in the image of the divine.
Mm.
Yes. May it be
That's
so.
who I want to be. Thank you. Yes, may it be
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
What hope
Sure.
does is it creates a set of expectations. And so when those expectations aren't met, and I'm seeing it, so many activists, they just go down in despair and cynicism and rage.
Mm-hmm.
So they're destroying their inner well being, and they're
Mm.
destroying any possibility of a good life, a well
Mm.
being. That's the right word here.
Mm.
Other younger activists now are saying, well, the hope is in our actions. But even that is related to outcomes. So I've, for many, many years now, written a lot about hope and fear come together. You can't hope for a certain outcome without the fear that arises or the despair when you fail. And we are failing at all these large scale attempts at change. It's going to continue. There's a biological, scientific explanation for it. But anyway, I want people to be focused on doing their very best. And then there's joy in the doing. And then
Mm.
whatever happens, it's out of our hands,
Mm.
in most cases. But
Mm.
there's so much joy in doing meaningful work together as a community and learning about one another and exploring possibilities. And what learned from years of working in community is if you're together and you try something and it doesn't work, you don't get despairing. You just say, okay, we got to come up with another way to do this.
Try
You
again.
create it. I mean, the real
Right.
source of creativity here is everyone being engaged in wanting to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Enormous creativity is available then, enormous levels. Yeah.
No,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're asking all of our guests this season a final question, and it actually comes from the last chapter in your book. Um, and so, in the midst of all that we've talked about and the realities that exist in the world, and the leadership that you've been called to and been a part of, what do you want to be remembered for?
yeah. I was once asked this question in the 1990s, um, to which I replied then, she brought more possibility into the world. And I think now, a friend of mine, were designing our tombstones years ago, and it was just like, oh, well, we tried.
Oh my.
I have no need for legacy. I have no need to be remembered, but I do have a need to say to people, I tried my very best to
Mm.
awaken our human spirits.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Oh,
I'll tell you what's
I
on my
do.
tombstone now, even though I will never have a tombstone. But I want to go out trying my very best through whatever means I have available to awaken people
Mm.
to the beauty of our human spirits, because it's
Yeah.
phenomenal beauty. Um, but my newest tombstone reads, "We were together. I forget the rest."
Oh,
Oh.
Isn't that
Oh,
beautiful?
there it
You could
is.
preach that.
It is
we were together.
But it's so
beautiful.
powerful.
Yes.
And I was with a group of elder Catholic sisters. I was speaking at a university, where they were part of the university. And I said this uh, to close my talk. And then at lunch, a group of these sisters who were well into their 80s, as so many sisters are now, Catholic sisters, um, and they called me over. They said, Dr. Wheatley, we remember the first part of that. We were together, but we don't remember the second part. I, it was
You said,
beautiful.
great,
Yep,
mission
you got
accomplished.
it. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. This
Well,
is a
thank you.
treasure.
It's been
Um,
delightful to be with
yeah.
you.
Thank you
I
just for
can't
your
always speak so truthfully about the spirit, so it's always a liberating experience for me
Mm,
to be in a
that's nice.
community of faith. Yeah.
no, thank
Yes.
you so much just for your work in the world. I mean, it has definitely impacted me and all the communities that I've been a part of.
Oh my gosh, you all. This has been amazing. So I just want to stop for a moment and take a deep breath and just know we've been in the presence of such wisdom. That was an amazing conversation, and I cannot wait to jump into this with you, Shannon, as we think about the ideas and images and challenging words that Meg gave us. We're going to spend a few minutes pulling on some threads from this conversation. And again, listeners, if you have any reactions, ideas, thoughts, please do email us. We would love to hear from you. Shannon, where are you in this moment?
Well, oh my gosh, I still feel just incredibly grateful for this experience, like to sit
Hmm.
with her for an hour. And, and she was just so generous with her
Yes.
thinking and her creativity, and just felt like, she was just so kind to us in the way she had a conversation with us.
Yes.
And there were things that she said that have really challenged me. I mean,
Hmm.
really challenged me, and and then there are things I thought, there are some places where I disagree, and I'm like, wait a minute, I can't buy that. And then there are other places where I'm like, oh yeah, I've had that wrong. How how's it shape what I'm doing now in a
Hmm.
different way? But oh gosh, what a rich conversation.
Yes. Yes. So let's jump in. I want to I want to start with this what I think is one of the most significant shifts that she raised, and that is
Mm,
the two loop theory, which we have used so much to focus on the shift happening from the dominant system to an emerging system, and how important it is to spotlight innovations and innovators and network them, and knowing that when you network innovators that they organize for change. And she is really adjusting her thinking there and updating it, if you will, and saying, you can't be, we can't be thinking about global change as if everything is going to get better, because she's saying it's not going to
mm,
happen. So
yeah.
she's doubling down on the islands of sanity, if you will, that we create, and focus on what we can change in our own selves to be more human, but also and sort of embody this spirit, what she calls a warrior for the human spirit, right?
Mm,
Embodied leadership, if you will,
mm,
but also creating islands of sanity. And we're going to have to live with this a bit and say, what is that? What are the implications for us as leaders and as ones who are trying to help leaders lead, right? And
mm.
in our role. And so, what were your reactions to that? What stood out for you?
Oh my gosh. There are a few things that stood out for me, honestly. And I think you jumped to this piece that's like really, really the one of Russell, right? Like she says,
Yeah.
we've got to face reality. If we don't face reality, we can't be useful. And that we can't, like, the real problems that we're facing can't be solved. Like, that's really at the scale they need to be solved.
Yeah.
That we can only solve problems in our community. And I really struggle with that, to be honest. Um, but and I but then I think what she, I really think she's saying is, we've got to settle down, and together, when we start really caring for one another, seeing the problems at the ground level, that's also maybe all that. It's like when we really pay attention and tend to that work,
Mhm.
that's what's important. And we can really grapple with that. And I think she's also saying, I think she's, I wonder if it actually helps us lower the expectations
Mhm.
of, and I wonder how it ties to what she said earlier in the episode about people feel really upended about what a meaningful life is.
Mm.
Like you want to do work that's meaningful. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up. We were going to be the world changers, right? Um,
And here we
and
are.
and here we are, and trying to make a difference in the world. But it's like, well, maybe it takes some pressure off that we the work is still meaningful, the work is still good, but we've got to just do what we can do with what's at hand. I don't know. So that's one thing that's, yeah, you go. I've got another thought around the death piece that's really stood out for me.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you say that because in some ways it takes the pressure off in terms of the global scale, but it actually puts the pressure on locally. Like in some ways
Oh,
we do this sort of work avoidance where we're like trying to do things to scale, but we're not paying
mm,
attention to what's right here at home. And the same kind of both and happened with Hope. Like in some ways
mm.
she really, I mean, she pushed uh, and said, no, don't be addicted to hope. Like we're
Oh,
addicted to hope. Don't be too hopeful. But at the same time, the hope comes in we can restore sanity in our own corner of the world and with our own
yeah.
people, right? And whoever that is, and the neighbor we don't know, and the whatever it is, right? And so there's a don't be too hopeful, but here's the hope. And anyway, so it's this both and.
Well, and do we need a new language? Because she also talks
Mm,
about possibility. What, right?
yes.
Like, I think possibility can sometimes be exchanged for hope. I mean, I'm not a
Uh-huh.
theologian, but I'm like, possibility, like,
Yes.
is
Yes.
a good, it's a something's changing. It's possible to do something,
Yeah.
right? I do want to talk about, in the two loop theory, it was always about creating this really gentle death as quick as possible for the
Mm.
as the
The
old, right? So
hospice.
it's,
Yes.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's a gentle death. And she changed that as well, and it's not as radical. So I think it took me a while to really reflect on it. But she says it's not the gentle death, it's about as value rich and understanding before you
Mm.
die. Like, what do
Hmm.
you need to transmit? Is what she said there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I wonder what that means for the work of institutions and churches right now as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
It's like that really understanding what has been and the why we exist. And
Yes. What's the deep well? What do we have to draw from the deep well of tradition, as well as what can we let go of in order
mm,
to live into the future? And so we're always asking ourselves, what is ours to do? And I mean that from an organizational standpoint, from Wesleyan Impact Partners and Texas Methodist Foundation, what is ours to do? But I also think that's a question for us as individual disciples. What is ours to do
mm,
in this moment as leaders? What is ours to do?
mm,
But also for the church to be asking this question. And this is connected
mm,
to the piece of there are parts of our church that understandably and rightly are dying, being phased out, that we're letting go of. But what is the value rich aspect that we do not want to lose? Right?
mm,
What are the deep truths and core purpose and
mm,
values that we don't want to
mm,
lose and want to actually double down on and be fully embodied in what is moving
mm,
forward. So I'm going to be living with and revisiting this conversation
mm,
to say, what is ours to do in this
mm,
moment? And that's for me as an individual and
mm.
as a leader, but that's also in our work.
Yeah, me too, Lisa. It's like, I mean, I am really wrestling. Her words really encouraged me for the work I did in the last season of my life, like
Mhm.
more than,
Mm.
and it's like, oh, how much of that? do I need to bring forward, like in the way I
Yeah.
think about community and life together and purposeful work together.
Yeah.
But I did think that, so I agree. I'm just going to be wrestling with it and sitting with her
Mhm.
words. But I loved, she did say there's different work for leaders to do, right? I think
Yes.
she used that phrase. And that work is to create the
Mm.
conditions for people to be generous, creative, and kind, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I feel like that's the work. Like, if we kind of just thinking again about the two loop, that's the work for both the new and the old. Whereas
Yeah.
I think I wonder if with the work of innovation, it's been about the new thing. And she says it's not about innovation and creativity just for the new thing, but it's innovation and creativity to prepare our communities. Like, that was her friend, and I was like, oh, now
Yeah.
there's a nuance difference there
Yes.
in the way she's
Yes.
talking about innovation, and
Yes.
that the work is to create the conditions for people to settle down
That's so
before,
good.
and then it's for leaders creating the conditions to settle down, and then to do meaningful work together.
Mhm.
That's a very different role of leadership in
Yeah.
this time that she's talking about.
Yeah. And, you are alluding to this, but this, she talked about how we're living in and operating out of threat mode,
Mm,
which of course puts us into our reptilian brain, or however you want to talk about
mm,
that. And that, so when you say we've got to help people settle down, it's like we can't be in community together or be our best selves if we can't get out of that threat mode.
mm,
And talked about the value of moving towards service. That when we're serving others, we're able to not just name our grief, but get out of our grief, not just name our anxiety and sense of threat, but get out of that
mm,
place. That when we turn
mm,
toward service, so many good
yeah,
things here, and so many
mm,
threads that we could pull on.
mm,
I want to, invite you all again to reach out with your thoughts and comments. I hope this is an ongoing conversation. I want to end with a quote from Meg Wheatley. So hear these words. And they are indeed words of hope and possibility, which I think it's a really good note to end on,
yeah.
says one who is addicted to hope. So um, listen to her words. I hope we can reclaim conversation as our route back to each other and as a path forward to a hopeful future. It only requires imagination and courage and faith. These are qualities possessed by everyone. Now is the time to exercise them to their fullest. By the grace of God, may it be so.